government upheaval, so you can stay ahead of the changes in our world and keep your family safe. Fortunately for us, we can recognize that we're at the precipice, a point in history where we can all see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us. So let's start the conversation, and welcome to the show.
And welcome everyone, welcome all on this beautiful blue planet. Another breath to be appreciative of here. How did you spend your day on this beautiful blue planet? What possibilities did you actuate? A lot of people are looking at the things that are scattering the concentration, but are you still focused on progress to take our planet back? Whatever form that takes, planting your garden, smiling at somebody else, not buying into the fear. You know, and we just discovered electricity again today, or I should say this last week. The patents, as in patents issued by the patent office in the middle and late 1800s to Nikola Tesla, he was talking about pulling electricity from the air so we wouldn't have to burn anything. We wouldn't have to burn any coal or oil. At the same time, if you use magnets on spinning discs that spin in the opposite direction of each other, they become weightless, and then we have anti-gravity craft. You have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, this was in the 1880s and 1890s, but it would only work if you could pull electricity from the ether, the air around you, the millivolt charge that surrounds everything, from 100 miles up to the crust, the feet, where your feet walk on the ground. And NASA just verified it, that it's actually true. It's the global electric circuit. How could we have been so naive not to pull directly from that? And they are talking about atmospheric electricity harvesting as we speak this week, if you can believe it. We're just going to leapfrog right over all the solar panels and windmills. We don't even need them. We never needed cars, trucks either. You get that? That's the whole thing. That was the whole scam. We had this technology more than 140 years ago. 130, I'll be generous, say 100. But we didn't utilize it. We were pushed into this consumerism debt system to lock everybody on this planet to a consumptive model and make corporations just trillionaires. When we could have gone past this, there would be no global warming, there would be no global taxes, there would be no social credit scores, there would be none of this. Had we gone and used atmospheric electricity and wireless power and magnetic motors, these motors are driven by the Earth's magnetic field, free. They spin forever as long as the Earth has a magnetic field. That rod, that spindle will spin indefinitely. We don't even need to make steam anymore to make a spindle or a rod spin, and then that is connected to a generator / alternator / power source. We wouldn't have needed that at all from day one. So sure, we wouldn't have needed the copper cabling around the planet. We wouldn't have needed the railroads either. We never would have had to build road systems, i.e. highways and roads and that sort of thing. No cables, nothing. We could have floated above the Earth. Now, maybe they would have had to made some sort of, areas where there were no trees so you could cruise down. But in terms of what we understand today, everything's dense and heavy, and on tires on a roadway on asphalt would be never existed. So think about how different the world would be. You never would have had to pay for your power. You never would have had to bought a single liter of petrol or a single gallon, for those of you in the U.S. And here we sit today, 120 plus years later. Oh, suddenly they found the same thing that was already discovered. So wait, that is the question to ask. Why is it only being found now? What's going on? Was that the bait and the switch with the solar panels and the windmills and the electric cars? Is that all a bait and switch? Because the realization of I'm going to thank you for everybody joining us tonight. Last factoid I'm going to put here before Ransom hops on is to complete the transition in this quote unquote new Green Deal into where they want to take it with the, movement of all of these green devices to replace fossil fuel burning / electrical devices. We're going to have to mine more copper in the next 20 years. And copper, very common element, super easy to find. We're going to have to mine more copper out of the ground, dig it, more fuel, more usage, more heavy machines to dig the copper to make your solar panel and all that. We're going to need more copper in the next 20 years than we did combined in the last 2,000. If you can believe that. So, where does that leave us? That's not even possible. So they realize it, and now they're talking about atmospheric electricity harvesting. So, Ransom, thanks for joining me. Starting the show like that.
Is this like when the doctor tells you that you shouldn't worry about quantity of life as much as quality of life? I think this, it would make sense that they would do this like right now, right at the plateau. Kind of, we're coming up to the plateau of population reproduction to where we start going into the negative of the worldwide population. So now they have that marked at.
Okay, back on.
You're back on.
Oh, sorry, I was yelling. Sorry, I was. I had clicked myself off the broadcast because I pressed the wrong button.
Oh.
And I was telling somebody, wait, it's okay, I'm back on. So please continue.
You. No, I was just saying that we're kind of at that point where it makes sense to all of a sudden give some nice things here at the end of this, because now the UN has finally decided to give a number to the population plateau, and that's the point when our population starts going down. But I've been telling people for a long time, with falling birth rates, fertility issues, we even know that the third world countries are going to start taking on some of the first world countries' habits, which seem to play a part in that. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, so we're getting to that point where they're going to have to start explaining why there is no population growth anywhere, and it's actually just going to start exponentially reducing. So just think about how ironic or coincidental that is right when we come into the era of functional robotics and AI control of everything. It just makes sense. I mean, this world that they're preaching doesn't have that many people in it. Kind of like the Georgia Guidestones, we kind of know where that's where, that was a foreshadowing of their plans there. I think maybe that's why they blew it up, because we're coming into the times where they're going to be converting things over to what that said on there. And I don't think that was meant for a post-apocalyptic world. It was meant for a pre-apocalyptic world as a warning of the plans that they have for us. So like the worldwide, what do you call it? We'll get to the chemical, and I'll get to your green agenda. I've kind of figured that out. Exactly what that is. It has the most furthest away from the green idea that you can possibly get. So the world, what is it? The UN's own data now shows that they expect the entire world average total fertility rate to fall below replacement level by 2056. I have a feeling that that's a number that they've estimated to make it sound like it's a little further off than it is. I think it's right now. And we've actually been, talking about what does the post world of this look like. And, I even retweeted the person that put that tweet out, which was Truth Stream Media, and I responded by saying, remember Vladimir Lenin's great quote, "Just give me one generation of youth, and I'll transform the whole world." And that's exactly what they're going to do. So now, kind of wireless free energy would be the way that they would need to run this world with less people on it. And think about this. I've said it many times. It only takes 20 years to have a generation of youth that transforms any society. So you're seeing that in Europe right now. 18, 20-year-olds kind of are newly arriving, and, they have certain expectations of what they're supposed to get. But I have a feeling that they're just little chess pieces being moved around on the board for when the final trigger happens to initiate more exponential population reduction. So it'll fall in line with the natural plateau of the world's population. And then let's get to the green agenda. What are we really talking about besides going out to all of the best prime farmland and wildlife refuges and open usable land on Earth and filling it up with things that are these monstrosities? And I'm talking about the wind turbine generators, for one, which are they fail, and then they have to put them somewhere, and they bury them. They don't recycle them. They don't do anything. These are made out of completely toxic materials that it requires massive amounts of petroleum products to build. Just the grease alone to run the stuff, that's tons and tons and tons of fossil fuel products, that's going into that. Now let's get to the solar panels. They're all completely made out of toxic materials. And we all know, even if you're on the side of the climate change by man people, we all know that hailstorms happen. And when they happen, sometimes they are horrible. And when you see what happens to a solar farm after a hailstorm, you would realize that this is a bad idea. And think about this. These are all the primest farmlands, open areas, wildlife refuges where you would find meat roaming the earth in herds. I'll just put it that way, or where you could cattle. And they're completely arranging where all of these are unusable areas, and in the near future will be completely toxified to the point where you cannot grow crops on them. And maybe you can't eat the meat from the animals that herd in those areas because, well, the ground is completely toxic because they've been burying bad stuff that they had to get rid of that they knew wasn't never going to work. So if they moved over to wireless power kind of from the Earth's magnetic and electronic grid that it has that naturally produces this energy, and we tapped into that, that wouldn't be for us, for our civilization. That would be for the civilization of a very, very reduced number of people who live better lives. That'll be the sales pitch. Look, we saved the world. We kept it from burning up. Now it's getting colder every year. We're not going to talk about why. But look, we've built all of these electronics. We'll have a robot in every home. Matter of fact, there already is. You just don't recognize it because it's not tall enough or strong enough to actually, interfere with you physically. But that's all going to change when the population is smaller, and then you'll see how a small population would have to deal with a manufacturing center of not only a new type of people that have no mother, no father, and really all they have is let's call it a programming from a parent corporation. Now, this can be done genetically or just indoctrination, but these people will have no parents, so they won't be aligned with any religion. They won't be aligned with the nuclear family idea, none of that. They'll be involved in a new type of life where it's promised, there's all of these different nice drugs that help you do this or that, and robotic assistment. You won't have to do nothing. You won't even have to work. All you'll have to be, the only purpose that you will have at that point is just to entertain and feed the machine of the technocrats. That's kind of the idea. It's a form of slavery that people don't know that they're in. It's a prison they can't see the bars to because everything seems better than, those last couple decades of bad things like, famine, disease, war, poverty. We kind of know the economy's tanking. All the signs are there that it's a bubble that's just ready for one single trigger that changes everything about the way you live. Now, not to be a pessimist, but when that happens, that's a domino effect that allows these technocrats to implement every one of their little sick plans, and it'll all be brought to you in the name of your safety, your comfort, and, the eradication of what seems like bad ideas from those people, the humans, the regular humans that used to live in the prior civilization.
But that's the problem. The information of the people living in the prior civilization pointing to what made the problem. How many generations does that take to erase that? To burn the books, to burn the manuscripts, to outweight, outlast, or outlive those that remember that time? Because I don't remember anybody around from the 1880s that's alive to this point to tell us about Tesla. What was going on at the time with central banking in earnest after the Civil War had ended? Like what happened coming off the bimetallic metal system from gold and silver being used as money, and then suddenly right after the Civil War, we just go to a gold-based system, gold-backed system versus gold and silver. Like what did the world, is what we're even being told in the history books true? I mean, to a point, yes. But to a lot of points, no. I mean, history is written by the victors, so you're telling me the good guys win every single time, 100% of the time. That's pretty much as our history had been said, Ransom, as you spoke that once before. It's our history, look at it, just look back, it makes no sense. It's always the good guys win. The person's, no, but it's so distorted. Like you look at today's world, just in a matter of 5 years, how distorted it's become and what you can or can't say and what's going to be removed and talked of being removed. 5 years. Can you imagine stretching on a 150-year period? Do you think today's world will be described correctly in 150 years from now or 100 years from now? If it's not written down in books, which is very little is from the 90s to today, almost everything's digital. I would say of today's world, probably 90%, and I might even be undershooting it. 90% of all generated text content is digital. Even though we have the newspapers and the magazines, and we still buy books, and we have print on demand and that sort of luxury these days, the total takers of books and printed material itself is probably, at least in America, what, 3%? That's about the number of people that are using VPNs currently, too. I want to give a shout out to Ian, somebody who is guiding me on my way of understanding the advertising world. VPNs. So the way I'm looking at it is, man, everybody who's doing banking has to be using a VPN. You have to. You need your information secure when you don't want people seeing the passwords and stuff. If they're intercepting your traffic, who knows where the traffic's going? Who knows, who's looking at it, intercepting it? I was thinking it was somewhere, 25, 30, 35% of people were using VPNs at any one time. He's like, no, 3. Well, going on that is the same thing. Like most people are consuming content today are doing it in a digital format. So if we have a grid down, by the way, there was an X2 off of the sun today, X-Flare class 2, which is an X1 is the smallest. So an X2 is bigger, an X22 or an X45 is what the Carrington event was. So we're sitting in there somewhere in the middle of the low range end, but it was off the back side of the sun and it was a halo. You could see it wrap around the sun and come toward the earth on a halo CME. If we were to get a large one, 90% of everything that has been known in the last 30 years would disappear. And then what would be left? It would be the stories, and you're already learning that you can't talk about certain stories, or if you connect dots and stories together and point fingers at the correct people, you're not allowed to talk about that. The amount of corruption, the amount of money printing, the amount of just sheer evil that is on the face of the planet right now, you're not allowed to talk about it. So how would history be reconstructed in 100 years from now with no written records, with very little written records? Can you imagine the only written records were the newspapers, and all they're doing is finding like New York Times and Washington Compost and all these types of written things that are out there for us? Politico, ooh, wow. What about would there be anything? Oh, NPR, they have a printed magazine in addition to the radio. Can you imagine stumbling across all the printed works of this time? And you in 150 years, you found this treasure trove of all it was some person who, just like I said, had NPR, Washington Post, New York Times. So that's what you stumbled into, like a whole room full of printed material from 150 years ago. Can you imagine finding that compared to what was really told about the history? And not only finding that, but being inundated with that just one side of information. Like, you would paint a very different picture of the world than truly the way it was. Like, people opposed a lot of these policies. People didn't want the never ending money printing. They don't want the austerity. They want purpose in life. They want to, have that hope for the future that their generation's going to get better and their children's generations can get better. That's why I want to keep working harder, because I know there's opportunity in the future. But the way you would read through the newspapers now, there's none. It's hopeless. Gray cloud, open the shutters, it's gray skies. We're in a gray room with gray shutters, and you open, even the light's gray today. Oh, the light broke. There's no light. It's only somber chemtrail filled sky, filtered sun, gray light coming through the gray windows. That's how they would want you to perceive, and that's how you would perceive it if you only had that written material, which is scary. And I'm trying to wrap it around us. It's terrifying to know only what's in print right now and the future generations of what they would read about this. Because if I pick up an old newspaper from like 1888 or 1890, it's going to be different than you might have pictured with some of the articles if you read through. They're very simple to read. They're very logical. They make total sense. They paint a picture of the day itself. But, this whole thing, toxic skies, toxic soil, reduction of trees. Because I remember in the 1970s, it was all like, man, save the trees, hug the trees. Sequoias live in the trees. You got all these people in the 80s and 90s living in the trees. Stop, don't cut it down. And now what do? They cut down thousands, hundreds of thousands of acres of trees to put up windmills, which take an incredible amount of carbon fiber blades. Are you kidding me? That's green energy in today's world. Green energy with megawatt generators on big sticks up a couple 100 feet or 100 feet or 80, however it is, to cross and grab that wind. And you should see the foundation blocks that these things, the amount of rebar in one of these foundations for a windmill is stupendous. I actually, on the Adapt 2030 channel, it's a hexagon shape, and the amount of rebar in there itself is something like 10,000 pounds of rebar. And then they fill it with concrete. And the total thing after that, I think it was 200 tons. Or was it 10 tons of rebar and then 200 tons of concrete? Whatever way it worked out. When they disassemble these wind turbines, the foundations that they set are too big and too heavy. They just basically cut it at the ground level, and those, what would be megaliths if we find it in 1,000 years, that would be a megalith, remain in the ground. And then, that wind turbine that split apart off of Martha's Vineyard, and all those pieces that came ashore and they closed the beaches because it was toxic and hazardous and floating in the water and just stabbing people and leaving fiberglass shards inches deep into your skin. Whoa, worse than sharks. Great white sharks ain't got nothing on a broken wind blade floating in high surf. Ripped to shreds. These fiberglass shreds 5, 6, 8, 10 feet long compared to a great white shark. I'd rather be out there with a great white shark than I would shards of fiberglass rolling through heavy surf. What? And this is what they've sold us on. That this is acceptable. To use twice as much fossil fuels to mine something to then produce a product that has a forever fingerprint on it, doesn't break down, as the replacement for trees, as the replacement for something that's half as inefficient. I just don't know how we got hoodwinked so quickly and so all hook, line, and sinker on this green agenda. The amount of e-waste, because e-waste, you talk about computers every year, how much do people throw away their computers, their mobile phones, their Logitech cameras, their microphones, whatever it is, the keyboards, toss it all. And everybody does, by the hundreds of millions every year, replace just e-waste, electronic waste. Goes to China to get recycled predominantly. They burn off all the plastic in China, and then they get the metal, and then that metal's refined, and they try to take the gold out first, and then they do some separation processes to be able to get the remainder of the different metals out. But all this e-waste goes into the Himalayan-sized mountains over there first, that they actually use flame and burn it in an open fire just to melt all the plastic off to get it to that base metal chunk, and then that gets refined. And then the stratospheric engineering ScopeX, Harvard University, wants to block the sun, but they can't figure out why the Atlantic Ocean is cooling with the Atlantic overturning oscillation is off, and they can't figure out why the Atlantic Ocean is cooling so much so fast right now. They're baffled. And at the same time, they can't figure out why the Atlantic Ocean is cooling, but they want to go up there with NASA's blessing, with David Keith and his marauding bunch of atmospheric marauders up there with ScopeX from Harvard, and go blanket our skies with sunlight reflecting particles and actually dim the sun from the amount of sunlight reaching the planet's surface. But they can't figure out why the ocean's cooling, but they want to run away with these two projects. I'm telling you, we are in geoengineering territory. There's an invasive hominid species on the face of our planet directing all of this. Because I went from save the trees, save the whales, hug a tree, to cut it all down, put up the windmills, and let's put the windmills in the water where it cavitates and causes so much low electric frequency that it disrupts whales' brains and causes strandings, or actually drives them insane with nonstop fingernails down the board with the low EMF there across the oceans. And that's great, man. Like that whole twist there. Something has taken, we've been invaded. Something has taken over our planet when we've come to this point right now. And Ransom, I was trying to go somewhere with that. I had even a scribbled note, but I lost my train of thought there. So hopefully you can pick it up.
It's the invasive species of the psychopath. I mean, you can't come to any other conclusion when you realize like their plans accidentally are always the worst plans possible. Like, I don't know, put in fluorosilicic acid in the water for people to drink, and then waiting decades and decades and go, oops, oh, well, maybe that made you a little dumber. Even though people tried to tell people. And it's funny that you talked about how they rewrite history. You don't have to wait decades anymore. They rewrite history within the week. I mean, they do it all the time, constantly. They've gone from, we disabled all of those weapons we happened to left over there in Afghanistan to, oops, well, they work, but we were gonna disable them. And then you'll have people arguing those little nuances, skipping over the in-your-face idea that that they left those weapons there on purpose for a destabilization campaign. They knew that those weapons would be used again, and that's exactly why they left them there. Just like they, accidentally would airdrop ISIS surface-to-air missiles and things like that, and Stinger missiles, different stuff, and accidentally drop them crates of American-made AK-47s and M4s, and oopsies, it was a mistake that we shipped all of those Toyotas over there so that they could just drive around so easily. It's always on accident. As Hillary Clinton says, though, what difference does it make? And it doesn't, because we'll just change the narrative, change the story, the factoids, within the next month or two. And if you say that it's not that, then we'll label you a Russian disinformation agent. Have you seen the thing that they're doing now? YouTube is just right and left deleting channels that were listed by the, Department of Defense as Russian assets. And if you look at the list, it's really unbelievable that all of those people are that. But it doesn't matter, because they're the ones that are writing the history right now. That's happening everywhere. Like, here's a good example of what I'm talking about. Me and you have discussed on this program lots of times that you are not in privacy in your own home. You're just not. You've never been, probably since 2010, since the real initiation of everybody on the planet having smartphones and cell phones with them. Here's one. When smartphones get smarter, do we get dumber? Well, the answer to that is yes. That's part of the plan. We have now been converted over to a population that uses the internet and the phone for off-site storage, or an external hard drive. Oh, what's 1/3 of 9? And people automatically go to their phone, and that's what this article's about. But worse than that, we've always talked about how they're spying on you all the time, and now we know that that's true. And the companies are coming clean. talking about how that they've been part of that the whole time. Yes, they're listening. Of course they are. Right here. Media giant CMG bragged about eavesdropping on phones, laptops, smart home microphones. In other words, those microphones that people think you're a conspiracy theorist for pointing out that's in their stove and, all of their smart appliances. They're all wired together. They're all using infrared to use mapping technology to find out what's in your home, where you're at in your home, how long you spend there, so that they can sell you the products. And this is all part of this next world of things that will be implemented. Right now, we're the petri dish. We're the beta to see how these programs work and see, how far we will allow them to do it. So for years, people thought, you know what? You better have a warrant if you want to tap my telephone at home when we were on landlines. But when we got cell phones, we just kind of said, you know what? They're probably listening. And then, a couple of whistleblowers later, we know they're listening, but then everybody forgets and says, nah, they're not doing that. And then now companies are just bragging willy-nilly that they're all listening. They're all taking every keystroke that you write, every search that you look at, every page that you browse. All of that is going into a massive metadata collection. And I don't think it's for the purposes of, caring about what you do in your personal life. It's just raw data that they can analyze to see the behaviors of human beings and how to control them better. And that's why whenever you take your smartphone with you, everybody wants to have their phone with you, but you forget that every place that you go pings off of your phone and creates a little record of every place you go. So it's not just the Internet of Things when you go to the Internet and you look at this or you read that or whatever. There is some really ingenious programs that keep track of when your eye's looking at something, exactly what you're reading. And people forget that all of these little programs exist and millions of them are being created daily. Now imagine what the people that are social engineering or, civilization engineering rather, are doing with this information. Well, they are controlling your attitude, your moods, and now we have to add the layer of technology that we now know is real. They're not just watching, they're manipulating. Now skip over the double slot concept of manipulating mind over matter or matter with your mind by observing it. They are observing. So they are manipulating in that way, but they're also going past that, and they're using various technologies to manipulate you, not only when you're hungry, and I've showed the studies. It's not just rats and monkeys that they're using the technology on to find out what happens. Every one of these experiments was for a purpose, to find out if they could do something they already knew that they could do. Those are just to ease the public into these ideas slowly but surely so that they feel like they're educated and aware of their surroundings like this. Most people know that their smartphones are, in fact, spying on them. There is, in fact, people out there that listen from time to time. But that's not the big idea here. The big idea here is the massive consolidation of information gathering and putting it out. So now we're getting to a point where as fast as they can take the information in, they can censor it, change it, alter it, and put it back into the feedback loop, which you were talking about earlier. You alluded to the news. Yes, they are saying negative things, but unfortunately, those negative things are way behind the times. These are just the little plans that you get to see, like who's going to have military action against who, but you're not getting to look at the final outcome. And it's obvious to me, at least at this point, that there is a group of possibly humans at the top of this pyramid. But even it doesn't really matter if it's an AI or it's an alien or it's angels and demons or just a group of psychotic, psychopathic, sociopathic humans that have interbred with each other over time to be the ruling elite that not only controls the printing of the money, but the fads and all of those things, what's for entertainment, what's cool, what every little kid wants to be when they grow up. They have all of these markets cornered with some severe and strong psychological propaganda, and I'm not going to say MK Ultra, because that would be like saying, hey, they're using the kindergartner program on people. No, the idea of mind control is so sophisticated at this point that I would say that every single person, even if they think they're not, is being manipulated in ways they can't even see, from every way, like from shopping to what news source they go to listen to. And it's really weird to, hear one side of the political spectrum talk about, look at the other side and all their talking points and the regurgitated ideas. And then when you hear the other side, I see the same pattern. So I know that both groups are being manipulated from the top, and they keep you arguing about things that don't matter. While people are arguing about the Green New Deal and whether or not it's okay for them to put up big windmills where they live, nobody's talking about what happens after they break and that they're just in the soil, and what happens to the land from all of these destroyed solar panels and different places. I guess we'll just start digging these giant deep pits, like I think it was Finland, to dump all our nuclear waste and other stuff into. But I wouldn't hold your breath. I think it was planned out that they destroy the majority of the world's farmland through industrial toxification.
Them's fighting words, Ransom. Them's fighting words right there. Yeah, so even if you get the land, you're going to have to deal with it. And everybody who bought us a double espresso through the last weeks, thank you so much. Now, I wanted to, start diving into some comments here. I'm over on the YouTube channel, the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast YouTube channel, which is slowly moving over to the Civilization Cycle podcast YouTube channel. So Knucklebuster here says, this is the whole thing. Like, you can live in two worlds at this time. And talking about solutions during this time, too, is Knucklebuster got a good here. He cut and split and stacked 2 cords of wood, elm wood, ELM, the elm tree. That's a lot of wood, man. That is a lot of wood, I must say. So think about, if your electricity goes out, are you going to have enough wood to be able to cook and heat through the winter? Now, it depends on what your zone is. Obviously, 2 cords of wood would definitely not be enough in places like Ohio and Canada. You're looking at multiple, like 10 cords. Must be in a, Virginia area or something like that would be doable for a couple of cords. But do you have wood set aside so you could cook at the same time? That's the question. Like, take this off of the digital for a moment and come back into the real. Like, what kind of day do you think this person had splitting wood with an axe, or using a hydraulic splitter that's running off a motor? You could do both. I mean, I'm sure. Running a chainsaw, getting that stuff up, getting it up and split, then stacking it, covering the stack. I mean, you're out in nature the whole day, so, how is that? Comparatively to being stuck and tracked, and if you didn't take your phone, what would be fun is just put the chainsaw right next to the phone all day long, and whoever's responsible for listening to is going to have a massive headache by the end of the day. We should all just take our phones with us and put them next to chainsaws in the forest for a full 24-hour period. Maybe some people will stop listening to you or whatever. It's like a screamer, something like that. But you have that choice. You're going to stay in the total digital world, or you're going to try to integrate between understanding the flow of information, what's happening, these current events, and then also dipping a toe or a full foot into your own food production, your own heat production. Because with that wood, you can boil water. With that, you can heat, you can cook. It's a tradable, and it all comes from nature for basically free if you have your own property. Elm trees, once they're dead, they're very brittle when they get, and they're still vertical up there if they've died for some reason, like you cut the roots when you were tilling or something. Elms are like glass, shall they say, but they burn good. So here's another one. James Sharp was saying, if you're really serious about prepping, a motorhome is a must, because the farm is not going to save you. You cannot protect it. Now, again, Ransom, I'm sure I'd like to compare an idea with you here and everybody else out there. What do you think about that? Myself, That motorhome is that's a bug out last. Absolute society's fallen apart completely when you need to leave your bug in spot as far as you can go into the countryside, where if that's been overrun and not safe, and you're leaving that safety spot of a farm way out in the countryside to get on a highway or a road in a motorhome and back into traffic, back into roadblocks. I think the motorhome, you'd have to almost be at the point of you are going to die right then, or you can leave, and no other choice in between. That's the only possible way you would hop in a motorhome and try to get out there, thinking that your odds of survival in a motorhome traveling on a road with all your belongings there is a major target. Because if it's gotten that bad where your farm's getting overrun and you need to flee, everything else out around you is broken down 10 times more than that. Because that's the whole indicator. If it's way out where you're living in the countryside, and like me too, if it's come out here this far and they're coming out to houses out here, then the rest of the cities are absolutely just they're not unthinkable, even how much of a collapse that would be in the cities for that kind of civil unrest, or let's say non-manners, to make their way out to the countryside here. I would really either be fleeing a forest fire or some kind of marauding army, because one thing watching the Ukraine war is I watched some updates because I'm interested, like in a remote place, how all-encompassing is an army moving through a place. Because looking at the Ukraine, I'll march everybody back and I'll walk you back for a second to the Adapt 2030 early days, where people are asking me, hey, where do you think safe zones would be? And I would always tell people, Republic of Georgia, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Well, since that time, that place has become very friendly to Americans, very inhospitable. But at that time, they had the longest winemaking continuous known historical record on the planet. 8,000 years of direct wine production, never interrupted even once from climate. So there's something there, that there must be sort of a special microclimate between the Black and the Caspian Sea that keeps that temperature somewhere in range where there's been continuous agriculture, non-broken, for 8,000 straight years. Like other places on the planet, they go down for 200-300 years, there's nothing, and then boom, then we find, seeds in pots again, that kind of thing. Not there, continuous. Another place, in Indonesia, there's an island called Sumba, Sumba, same name as the famous Hakuna Matata dragon Sumba. That was Simba, my bad. Okay, change the letter. Simba, Chabador. Sumba Island in Indonesia as well. Hey, and if you like to surf or you're on that edge, it's south of Bali, and you get even bigger waves, and they roll in unprotected, and you get way more waves, bigger waves. If you like bigger waves, Sumba Island's like a super secret spot you got to go to. I'm just saying, way super cheaper than Bali. Like, dude, seriously, it's so cheap out on the island there, compared to Bali, where it's runaway New York prices. You get back over to Sumba, it's like Indo back, where things are reasonably priced again. Enough where you could live there for years and years and years on just, American wages for a year, like crazy. So I was starting to tell people this. Some microclimates in America, but if you are looking at the Ukraine war, I was thinking that was a very, very remote spot as well. I knew the climate wasn't going to be that good, but it was an agricultural zone, and I was like, damn, that's the most remote that you can pretty much get, and then it gets in, you start to get into Russia, and you get really remote if you start heading north, not so much toward Moscow, but, it gets very sparsely populated the more north you go into Russia and up that direction. I was thinking, man, you're kind of at the edge before the thinning of population into a country goes. I thought, man, this is got to be a place where you get hide out. I was thinking that about Ukraine. And now as I look at Ukraine, I'm like, man, armies scour every inch of the land. I don't care how remote you would have been before the war started, how safe you thought you were with a farm in Ukraine. Like, oh, we're so super way tucked up here right on the border there with Russia. Like, nobody's ever going to find us up here. because most people were expecting trouble to come from a different direction. And some of the most remotest of the remote in wilderness, quote unquote, Europe is now just covered by, army walking through there. They're going to every square inch. So that would be a motorhome bug out for me. If an army was coming and I knew they were coming and they were hostile and they were covering every inch and you could just see the damage and like see it and hear it coming your direction, I would take my chance on a motorhome. Or if there was a forest fire. That's it. I don't know if you agree with that statement there, and I'll read it again, Ransom. So again, James Sharp, thanks for throwing the comment. Are you serious about prepping a motorhome as a must because your farm's not going to save you because you cannot protect it? Agree or disagree with that statement there, Ransom?
Well, I partially agree with it, and that's why I got a motorhome. It was one of the things I wasted some of my money on. I got me a nice motorhome, but I didn't really get it for the home itself because really that's a more, I would say one of the first steps that you would do. You need to have already been at the point where you have the motorhome at your bug out location. You're not going to drive it there if some kind of event happens because you're just a mobile target. You would have to leave early on, like way before everybody's freaking out. You would have to know for sure that that's happening to be able to travel safely anywhere before, all hell breaks loose. However, having it first and then, moving it or driving it to a location and learning the land where you're going to be going, you have to have a place to go. And I hate to say this, but with any World War scenario, you're really not going to live through that hiding in the forest anywhere. Because, let's say, on the other hand, I'm a bad guy. Everything fell apart. I take out my drone. I fly it around 5 square mile radius. I know where every campsite, every little building, every little house, trailer, RV, everything's at. So I know where all the targets are. So other people are going to be doing that. So what I mean by early on, it's a good way to move all your prepping supplies to the location you're going to be at. When you bug out, you're not going to want to be on any kind of interstate or highway in that thing. You're just a rolling target. All of your family and supplies are a target. So you would have to have that there already. And I do think it is part of a good strategy, but that's to have like a second bug out home ready to go. Matter of fact, there's a guy, I don't know why, or he doesn't have a place to go. He's not exactly homeless, but his motorhome's been out there for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 months, and he hasn't left. He has no electricity, no air conditioning, no nothing. He's basically not homeless. He's just placeless. And that idea is happening exponentially in the United States as the economy gets worse and worse. More people are retreating to their RVs, but most of those RVs end up broken, towed away, crashed, if they're actually using them on a regular basis. And there's absolutely no protection from the elements in those things at all if you run out of resources. They're super cold when it's cold, and they are super hot when it's hot. So that just needs to be a part of an overall plan to bug out. I think you and your family should be able to carry what's on each individual person's back, and each person should have enough supplies to get separated to where they'll be okay for a little while. I hope the United States never becomes that bad, but it's very possible for things to go upside down. And like I said about the war, you would either have to be on the winning faction or last long enough that the war ends, or you just don't make it through. So if there's something going on here where the government has collapsed and money isn't worth anything and there are roaming bands of people, they are going to outnumber the law enforcement by far. And so you need a group of people that you trust, know the terrain, have backup plans, plenty of boom boom sticks and the things that go in them, or you're just you're screwed. I hate to say that. You're not going to just, Rambo it with your family out in the wilderness, with a couple of magazines and 2 backpacks and an RV. It's just not happening. You need a place to go, a community that knows you and is on the same trip and knows what's going on and what they're going to be doing. And I'll say right now, I don't even have that. I'm still at the, gathering the supplies. I have all the supplies I need. I don't have the, multiple bug out places where I could drive an RV up there and park. And think about this. If things really get rough, people that you think are your friends or allies are going to not be so much friends and allies, because they're going to start thinking about their self. They're going to start thinking about the long-term, distribution of supplies. Now, if you're a valuable person, you might not have to worry about that. If you're an electrician, a real carpenter, a woodworker, a mechanic, because you can't really hack a gasoline motor. No cyber attack or even the sun is going to take out gasoline motors for that long. They're going to be up and running, and people are going to be searching, and they're going to be, setting up places. A good example of what would happen after your government fails is Mexico. Mexico is good in some places, wonderful, a great place. It has a lot of natural resources. However, there are roaming bands of criminals that will hijack you, steal your stuff, and murder you. That both of those things are true about Mexico. So you have a hard time traveling through some places safely. And if the powers that be that control that area, whether it's cartel or government or one and the same, you'll have to pay some kind of tax to those people to be able to go through, or if not, give up everything you have and become a migrant that has to move to a new location. And there's already millions of people coming here that are bugging out from other places. And, recently the Mexican government said they are no longer going to allow people to just randomly migrate through their country. They're going to put them on buses at the southern border and drop them off from buses on the northern border. So that's the way things are going. And, neither presidential candidate seems to understand that we really need to cut ourselves off and bug out as a country. And I don't want to say isolationist, but non-interference would be a good policy with everyone else while we get our own bug out supplies and prepping in order as a nation. Not to mention your local community, your neighborhood. Do you even know your neighbors? That's a place that a lot of millions of people are in. They don't know their neighbors. They probably don't want to know their neighbors. And then just imagine all of the millions of people around you, wherever you live, even if you think you live in a really rural area. If you start counting up the populations around you, you'll realize 70% of those people are going to be deer in headlights, and 20% of them are going to be predators. And, where do you fit into that? Unfortunately, there's where it comes down to which species is going to come through to the next cycle, if any. Will it be the regular God-fearing type human being that has morals and compassion, empathy, and other things, or is it going to be roaming bands of psychopathic, sociopaths that are willing to do anything to get what they want for instant gratification? None of them planned ahead, but they're more than happy to take what you got.
Yeah, there's going to be that percentage. And thank you for everybody joining us on Rumble tonight. Please remember, you can go to civilizationcycle.com. That's the website for the show here, civilizationcycle.com. We got the player list there for previous shows in the podcast format. Also, drop your email in the bottom there. We'll get you the show notes for these points that Ransom and I have been talking about tonight. It's usually between 7 to 9 quick bullet points so you can start conversations or remember what we spoke about, get a clear picture. And, it's time for a lot of people to come into the conversation, and they're willing as well. And then these are a good way that you could either share with them, print it off as bullet points as well, or talking points. That's civilizationcycle.com. Brian and Aaron joining us right here on Rumble. Bug out vehicles limited by fuel. If tanks are on roads blocking them, as in military tanks, you're effed. If you try to drive it off-road, at some point, the trails are going to be too untenable for a vehicle, and you're going to get stuck and bogged in the mud, especially if it rains. Then what? Then it comes down to ransoms. You're going to put whatever you can on your back and hope that you can walk out of there for quite some time, not like 10 minutes and be like, oh, I need to stop. It's too heavy. An hour later, oh, I need to stop. It's too heavy. I really don't have any water. We're talking about 24 hours straight walking light enough like that where, a shopping cart from Walmart might come in handy. if you're on a road, but then you'd be a target. And you're going to have to make some of these plans here. Just before we hop on the break here, Dalvanius Teve, make sure you all know how to make cordage from grasses and fibrous plants. Yeah, and how many other nuggets of wisdom like that could we also make a list of? Okay, now you need to know how to make a rudimentary water filter with sand, pebbles, fibrous plants as well.
Our premium beef cubes are sous vide, freeze-dried, and ready to be eaten right now, or in a decade from now. We want you to eat our beef now, so you can buy more. Prep with steaks, not with beef crumbles. This is a high-quality product. It's all American beef and 100% natural. None of that craziness of lab-grown meat and mRNA jabs. Our beef has a shelf life of 10+ years. This is high-quality cooked and freeze-dried beef for long-term storage or not. Eat well today and eat well tomorrow. Click the link in the description to get your Prepper beef with Prepper All Naturals, so you will always know what's for dinner.
If you're gearing up for emergency preparedness or camping, the Kelly Kettle is the most valuable piece of equipment you can own. Your Kelly Kettle can boil 1 liter of water in just a few minutes using natural fuel. Your kettle will allow you to quickly purify water for drinking, rehydrate food, or simply cook a meal. Whether you're a backpacker, fisherman, hunter, or emergency prepper, after one use, you'll know that the Kelly Kettle's a must. The specific design of the kettle allows you to start the fire and keep it burning in windy or rainy conditions. It's so easy to boil water and cook food all at the same time. The Kelly Kettle provides the ability to stay warm on a cold night, feed yourself properly with a variety of foods, stay hydrated, stay clean, and stay alive. The Kelly Kettle is simple to use with only 2 main pieces, the kettle and the fire base. Gather a small amount of natural fuel, fill the kettle with water, fill the fire base with any flammable material, place the kettle on the fire base, start a fire in the fire base, adding additional twigs and pine cones, etc. into the chimney. In a matter of minutes, you'll have boiling water for a hot drink or to hydrate food. Add a cook set and get breakfast going. The kettle does it all at the same time. The Kelly Kettle comes in 3 sizes: Trekker, small; Scout, medium; Base Camp, large. Each one available in aluminum or stainless steel. The variety of sizes means that there's a Kelly Kettle stove out there for everyone. Your Kelly Kettle is great in an emergency situation or just to have a hot drink on a camping trip. Purchase your Kelly Kettle today. Dependability, reliability, the ability, boil water, cook fast, and survive. Kelly Kettle, outdoor life enjoyed.
Pro Clear Cleanse is the most powerful spray cleaner on the market today. No elbow grease necessary. Pro Clear Cleanse cuts through grease and grime like a chef's knife. Finally, the one cleaner that can do it all. Powerful surfactant cleaning technology cleans ovens, glass, porcelain, even polished wood. Environmentally friendly, less packaging and waste with no harsh smells, pet safe, child safe. 5 tablets equals 1 bottle of traditional cleaner. It's 5 months of cleaning for a fraction of the cost. Behold the grease-erasing power of Odor Crush. Simply drop a tablet into your bottle of warm water and shake it so it is evenly diluted. Spray the surface you want cleaned. Let set longer for tougher grease. Take a paper towel or a reusable cloth and wipe. Done and done. One of the best things about Pro Clear Cleanse is you can take it anywhere. Hiking, camping, or on vacation. Without having to buy or bring cleaner, you can store the same potential in the tablets, then just add water and bam! You have a bottle of cleaner. Order now and make life a little easier and cleaner.
It's unknown if early man knew they would be the progenitors of great civilizations, or if they knew when their empires would fall and disappear into history. Fortunately for us as modern man, we can recognize that we are at the precipice, a point in history where we can see the cycle changing. Where we go from here is up to us.
See are either manifesting in the future or clearly visible, maybe not now happening, but the chances of a high probability of it happening. Almost everybody listening tonight, chatting in the live stream box on Rumble or YouTube or X, all talking about the same thing. Who can you trust in the countryside? You might think it's, oh, everybody knows everybody. It's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. Kumbaya, hold hands. It's only a town of 1,000 people. Yeah, but 20% of them are meth heads, that are stuck out in the countryside, 10%. So you got 100 people that are drug addicts. You know what I mean? Before this COVID thing came, people that lived in the countryside were generally, I'm going to say generally, before the Starlink systems and before the upgrades from all the internet people during COVID that, ran internet way out into the countryside that never was before, ever, never. You either lived in a city or a suburb or you didn't have internet, period. Suddenly that all flipped on a dime. COVID time. So all the people move out and they're like, hey, it's so quiet out here. Yeah, there's nothing to do. Well, those people were bored back then, so they just did drugs a lot. Back then, when I would say even 10, 15 years ago, you coming out there, you're into some poor places with a lot of drug use out in the rural countryside. I don't think that's going away just because the people got internet now. Those locals that are living around you, if you don't know them, there are going to be predator class. So how do you prepare for that? In addition to preparing for everything else, like I need to keep my animals safe, I need to get my gardens up, I need to talk with my other neighbors, think about security and these sort of things and how quickly, that's the whole thing, is like how quickly is it going to go and happen? Because I wanted to talk about some celestial events tonight too, in addition to the key points from NASA that they discovered long-sought global electric field on our planet Earth. Well, they thought there might have been some kind of polar wind 60 years ago, but wait, sorry, Tesla, 1880s, my friends. Electric field lifting charged particles, we can harvest that directly. So that's the new thing. These are new electric fields. Ambipolar electric fields is what they're called, and it's kind of an upwelling of electric current. Well, that would be expected in a looping system with magnetic field lines coming off the sun, connecting to our planet. Now, wouldn't it? If the sun is charged enough, highly enough to make that plasma keep dancing across the face of it, do you think that being connected directly to our Earth might have something to do with an electric current in there somewhere? Like, wait, it's always been here, always will. So I'm just asking about the timing. Why is this coming out right now? Base of it. Because do you see a couple of events that will be rolling in here electromagnetically, specifically October of this year. And then the planetary crossing, I would encourage anybody out there that has access to solar system scope. It's an easy one to use, planets or the planets today, but you can't go as far out on that model. SolarSystemScope.com. And if anybody were to roll the model out to December 6th of this year, you will see that there is a crossing. And when I say that, the Earth is in the center of two crossing and lining planet segments. Jupiter, Earth, Mercury, Sun. Direct line. That's a scary one because Mercury is an iron core and Jupiter is always a tugger. So just on Jupiter, Earth, Sun, we get 7.0 earthquakes. Man, that's a standard. Now you're going to throw in an iron core in the middle of that thing, Mercury, dead center of our planet, along with Jupiter tugging. Oh my, the show begins. But now at the same time, that lineup itself, Jupiter, Earth, Mars, Sun, just that's one line. That's the X plane, I guess. And we got to spin it the other direction because we have Mars, Earth, Venus in a line as well. So actually looking at a cross in the sky. you might call it a galactic cross, a cross. We're looking at a crossing here. This is incredible. So we're coming through an electromagnetic event where the four gas giants are lining in the outer solar system into a square. The Earth's going to run through the middle of that magnetic field, coupling with our sun. So we're going to go through two magnetic fields. And this particular squaring event hadn't been seen since 79 AD. All right, we're going to come through that perception change, whatever that is. I think it's going to be more human perception type of changes that governments are worried about, people becoming aware and awake and seeing the world for what it is during October. And then we quickly come into December, in the beginning of December, before Christmas and all this is going to be happening. We get a literal cross of the planets where the Earth is in the center as the center of the cross between heavy gravitational bodies pulling in two directions. Like again, I don't know what the last time this was to get in such a cross pull. But then after we come out of that, we'll come into 2025. And right in the very last weeks of March and into the first week of April, the Earth will be by itself on the outside of the sun, nothing else in front of us at all. All of the gas giants directly behind us. The only planet that's even remotely close to being not directly behind us is Mars. And all of the planets in our solar system are forming this gravitational well, for a better term, where anything that we are going to be transiting through is going to get slammed into the front of our planet for a good 4 months. So if you've been following the uptick in fireballs and these giant, especially the one in the Philippines that they tracked from satellite and then radar and understood that it would land somewhere over the Philippines, that was a 1 meter, 3 feet by 3 feet rock that they picked up before it entered our atmosphere. So they did a trajectory on it, and they found out that it would land over the northern Philippines, northern Luzon Island. So all the people were driving as fast as they could to try to get up to see where this fireball was coming in. And sure enough, man, it was massive. And we're just only in the middle between the sun and Saturn with Jupiter behind us. We're nowhere near way out in front of the sun by ourselves with all the gas giants behind us, all tugging in space debris, all at the exact same time. It's almost like we are in the very tip of the arrow, moving through space. There's nothing in front of us. Everything in the entire solar system is directly, and I mean directly, almost in a line behind us. So you have to ask yourself, like these three massive events inbound here right now, do you think that they might have something to do with the world schisming and the government's trying to take control and want to know where everybody is and all these guises for exercises? They need to now block out the skies. Why do they need to do that? And suddenly at the same time, you're telling, now I can't even make this up, suddenly at the exact same time when we're coming into an electromagnetic event that can be pinged and measured that hasn't been seen for 2,000 years. And all these independent scientists out there can now measure this magnetic field change as we roll into it. Some would say we can't because we're inside the field, so you can't measure a stronger field inside a field, but I digress. We're going to learn a lot about science during this time. Suddenly NASA discovers a global electric field at the same time we're coming into this magnetic anomaly. Really? Like, that's too unbelievable for me. 2 weeks ago, and then we're going to come into this new magnetic field disturbance here in like 2 months. And you see the weather changes just absolutely going gorilla ballistic everywhere. It's off the hook. Now the tides are going to get affected too. It's going to become, 2 to 3 times higher tides. We're not going to get giant tidal waves a mile high. No, we're going to get a good tidal tug of, a good doubling of high tide heights, maybe 3 times depending. But the velocity and how fast that water moves when it's double the height, it means that water goes out 2 times further also, but it comes in twice as fast. And all that extra push is going to damage a lot of stuff. So be a government and try to understand that an enormous amount of infrastructure is going to get broken during this time, literally unrepairable. And then you start to scratch your head and go, maybe that's the reason they haven't been repairing the bridges and the rail lines and all the locks and all this stuff that's decrepit and falling apart. Our electrical grid hadn't been repaired in like 70 years for a lot of this stuff. Highways falling apart, bridges breaking off the banks. Or is that earth cracking and the earth pulling the top miles of our crust is behaving strangely, and maybe the bridges are separating from the banks, and it's not really just shoddy construction, but the earth is actually shifting like it is in California right now. Slow moving, I guess like an earth slip. It's moving like a foot a day. Starting to see so many anomalies come, and then into this time of electromagnetic disturbance, we're coming to the cross. I really believe we're going to see, and this is a distant early warning, we are going to see some massive, I mean massive quakes and volcanic eruptions coming in the beginning of December this year. Again, we're going to learn a lot about science. Some people say, no, the Earth or the planets lining up, they don't do a single thing. There's very gravitational tug is so small it doesn't do sheezy. Okay, maybe that is perhaps correct for one directional, but then what if you're being tugged in another direction by planets as well? We're really going to get tugged in all cardinal directions by gravitational bodies that have been known to trigger larger quakes. Be a government, you know this is all inbound, right? Like how are people going to react? It's more about perception management. Then you're going to have to explain to them, all right, well, you know, by the way, after we flipped out of this magnetic thing and then you got the planets lining and all these quakes and a lot of stuff got damaged. By the way, when we roll around, there's going to be fireballs daily, like super giant ones in the daytime. It's going to freak people out to the point of like hieroglyphs on walls, kind of, you know, cave painting type deal. They're going to run into the mountains for survival. Like keep a civilization intact and running during all of this in the next year. That's why so much is pointing to this time. There's just so much happening. And again, Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us talk about this, because on some channels I gotta like walk it back on YouTube. On my main channel, I was with Seth Holhouse on Man in America yesterday, and we went for a good hour and a half talking about justice events and how it would shape and reshape society, how governments would try to control how the economy would be affected, and then who would survive through it, and how would you restart the new world after this damage if it were to play out. Now, nothing's 100%, of course, but it's of an if. What if it's only 10% of everything I'm talking about? Well, and there's still be an enormous amount of things to be reconstructed later on. It would disrupt some regional areas. And with the very light thinning, like the razor thin ice we're on anyway, I mean, something is bound to break before it would get better. So Revolution Radio, thank you for letting us. Revolution.radio, excuse me. I was going to shout out our own site, civilizationcycle.com. Revolution.radio, think about a donation right there in the navigation tab at the top, because Ransom and I want to continue this conversation. And Ransom, I don't know, just in a real sense here, like, what are the possibilities of coming into a new electromagnetic field that hasn't been seen in quite some time, couple thousand years, and NASA during the same couple of weeks, within 2 months of a 2,000-year period, just suddenly said, oh, we found a global electric field just floating up here. Like the timing on it's just, surreal. It truly is. Like we've been gaslighted this whole time, and suddenly they're coming out to tell the truth because they're going to be forced to. You can't hide this magnetic field disturbance that's inbound in October. It's too big. It's too all-encompassing. I'm just curious what the perception changes will be for humans looking at the reality with a new magnetic field in front of them. How are they going to interpret reality? That's the whole thing. It's going to have to be perception management. So anyway, Ransom, sorry, man, I rambled for 15 minutes. By the way, everybody, civilizationcycle.com if you want the show notes from tonight. And thank everybody for buying us a double espresso out there. I'll read some more comments as we're going through, but Ransom, take it away.
Well, to your point about, like, would they tell anybody, or what would they do, or, whatever, anything that would be negative like that, they're not going to say anything. How many governments warn the countries in areas that they may be bombarded with extra flooding because Hunga Tunga put up so much water in the atmosphere that it started flooding everywhere, not only in the southern hemisphere, but the northern hemisphere whenever it crossed over. I was looking at a graph the other day that showed the amount of water vapor, like right after Hunga Tunga. And, first you see it in the southern hemisphere and then later in both hemispheres. And we know that there was massive catastrophic flooding through that time. Why? Well, there was a lot of excess water in the atmosphere in play that usually wasn't there. Now, think about what you're talking about. If we got hit by items, multiple volcanoes go off. We kind of go over this a lot because these are the real threats to human civilization, not counting government plans of any kind. But naturally, we don't know really what happens exactly whenever there is little to no magnetic field, other than possibly mass mutation, animals dying off, which unfortunately includes us, and speciation. In other words, right afterwards, new things show up on the earth. It's really not conclusive whether or not those things that show up are like some type of new species, or they're just actually the same species that changed almost overnight. Almost like the human situation that we're talking about as far as going into the technological realm of being able to edit and create and manipulate human life from this point on to be more of a programmed entity than a free-willed, living, breathing, sentient human being that decides their own future. They didn't warn anybody about Hunga Tunga. And that would be like that for anything that would potentially lead to disasters or problems. Right now we have another big super factory explosion or whatever it is that's putting toxic stuff out in Ohio. And, a lot of people are calling it the same name as the other one, but like 2.0. And, it leads you into that conversation. Why at this point in civilization, when we're supposed to be so technologically advanced and so in control by all the authoritarian governments, do they keep having industrial accidents on the scale in which it's necessary to toxify the earth? And, when you listen to these green movements, they talk about all kinds of stuff, but rarely do they talk about despeciation or the toxification of the planet, not only through chemical means, but also genetic pollution and coming from different sources, changing of animals, changing of plants, a little bit of mosquito here, a little bit of something else over here. And then all of a sudden you have a new ecosystem that does not seem to be designed for human beings. And I'll point out the example of, we've been talking about all of these things that's bad for the planet. One thing that's not bad for the planet is CO2, yet, they preach and they tell us that that's some kind of a bad thing. It's, bad for humans, bad for our existence. We're making it and all this stuff. And then, we get studies that come out that shows there's really no significant imprint of human activity when it comes to CO2 in the environment. But yet, we'll ignore that because you don't get paid for that, and there's no future in preaching that more heat and more plant food would actually be good for civilization, plants, animals as a whole, and therefore human beings. Instead, the governments of the world, the billionaires of the world are doing things that you would think are kind of backwards to human civilization in the first place, toxifying being one. Altering the genetic biosphere too. And then you talked about, basically what we're calling stratospheric injectables, which several companies and billionaires have put up using various means, planes, blimps. New Mexico got a whole dusting of sulfur particles. Now, I think the reason that they're doing this is because they know the natural cycle is going to produce more cold weather. And in a few years, they will have all of the, kind of lies ready to take credit for every single emergency that humans have. We got a drug for this. We can help you with this overpopulation because, as many people have said, all we need is better medication, and therefore, we'll live longer and have less children, yada, yada. The arguments are out there. Some of the worst ones, which seem to be being implemented around the world, are self-termination or termination of your genetic future or legacy. They're making it available. They're almost, when do we get to the point where they're insisting that certain people have this done. It wouldn't be the first time in history that that's happened. We called it eugenics. It happens over and over again. But also this weird idea that the essentials for living on our planet are bad. Every human activity that's normal and positive is put in a negative light, all the way from having children to farming and growing animals, and all the way down to our literal breath that we breathe out. And all you hear about now are these, green initiatives, the solar panels, the wind farms, chopping down the forest somehow is going to help. All of these are obviously insane and not truthful ideas. Instead, they are covers for programs that are happening to fundamentally transform the earth into an unrecognizable place where they alone have control over everything from your decision making to who, why, when, people are born, and where they live. I'm sure you've seen plenty of the Agenda 2030 maps that are mapped out where they have decided to relocate people in this imagination of the elite, relocate them out of areas so that they can do something else with them. And that kind of falls into the green movement too. Although the places that they pick are prime fishing, if they have it off coast, they're prime prairie land where you could farm or raise cattle. All around the world, this is happening. In Europe, they're trying to convince people that the manure that their animals create and all of the gases that come off of them are somehow bad, when traditionally that would have been natural fertilizer and plant food for the surrounding area. And in fact, if the planet got warmer, which, it did for a little while, it seemed to increase the greening on Earth. So why you would want to imagine a world where it gets colder, has less CO2, less population, I don't know, unless you were terraforming it for another species, which is kind of the underlying topic we've been talking about. There not only is probably multiple species living amongst us today as far as a different brain, function, design, and other things that have been created through legacy, but indeed the entire population of the planet is a hybrid species of multiple different species of hominids in which they have completely mapped out the genes of every single one of those that they know about. So that means they can manipulate those. And now they're openly showing us that they can create new species. So when you look back at the fossil record and you see, oh, look, Neanderthal lived for 450,000 years, kind of just sat there doing his thing. He never changed. He never morphed. He never evolved. And then he's gone. And then, kind of we show up there, at least in the fossil record, which tells me, A, something happened that created us new, recently compared to the other hominids, or B, we lived somewhere else. And considering that most of the world is now 400 feet deeper in ocean, I can see that there was a lot more landmass out there in areas for species to live. So it's not just cut and dry, but just like you see Neanderthal show up and then disappear, it would be exactly that with our civilization if they converted over to a more designed civilization from the ground up, from babies being born and then being indoctrinated through the entire system. And we can see that playing out slowly, like a slow train wreck through these Marxist ideas, revolutions, so to speak, governments around the world that were formerly free turning to a more totalitarian, complete censoring and control mechanism type government. And these are supposed to be the good guys. To circle back what you were talking about, where you said, it's weird in history when you look that the good guys always win. Well, because they wrote themselves in as the good guys, and they did just as much genocide and corrupt, really anti-human ideas as any of the other powers did or were going to do. And it's ironic to me that we forget that some of the modern countries on the earth now have been guilty of democide in the tens of millions of people. And if you accumulate just in recent times, post-World War II, the amount of people that have died from genocide, it's the number one killer in the world. So if you think that they don't have their hands in all of these phenomenons that are happening, like fertility rates dropping, mass migration, movement of peoples, the introduction of new genetic material, not only through nature, but also by design through different areas like food and medicine, and soon to be delivered by animals. You realize that you already live in a different civilization than you did 10 years ago, and it's only going to exponentially grow in all of these ways. So we have to take the reins of it somehow. I'm not saying I know how, but if enough of the population says no, I do think we can correct the course, but it's like mission impossible. The tentacles are in every avenue of every industry, of everything you think of. There's only really a couple of companies now at the top. You know, you got your Vanguards and BlackRocks and superfood conglomerates that own all of the food and all of the food brands and all of the food makers. And you have the same thing in the medical industry where they own all of the companies that make things and then also serve time in the governments that tell you you have to take those things. And those same people, they never stop their plans. They just act like it never happened when they get busted or get caught doing something that's not true, and history is rewritten in real time. They just move on past it and start one of their new programs for us to deal with. Here's one from the Daily Mail. The lab that leaked the you-know-what may have also accidentally let another similar thing out, according to researchers. So you can take that however you want it. And to really, really circle around for those that can pay attention to every little point, anywhere in the Southwest, the best weaving material that's just everywhere, there's loads of it, is the yucca plant. And the Native Americans living in the Southwest all the way into ancient times have been making sandals, clothing, all kinds of stuff out of the yucca plant because you can strip it into very small strings and then twine it into fabric. Also, there's tools out there to use plastic bottles to make things that it just strips it out real quick. I forgot the name of it, but it's a really cool tool that you can use to make garbage into usable material. All right. Now I've rambled on.
I'm all about making a nice, cozy wool sweater out of recycled plastic bottles, man. If you can get that to thread out and I'm feeling cozy, I'll take a dose of microplastics to stay warm. You know what I mean? If I could just get past that. Like, what kind of world is this where we are not allowed to enjoy the comforts of wool because the animals are putting too much methane up there? But I look and I say, you know, you were talking about democide. Okay, so think about, you know, Native Americans here in the U.S. Like during that time, there were hundreds of millions of bison running around out in the plains. Hundreds of millions, plural. That's more than there are cows right now in the United States. There's not 200 million head of cow or head of, you know, beef in the U.S. There's not 200 million. You know, that was just one continent running wild, and then heaven forbid the other pack herds that would be there as well. I think about Africa in the 1700s, how much massive amount of wildlife would have been there. And if you ever want to go on a trip, like jump over into YouTube and look at 1930s Africa videos, and like the real ones where people were there and they were just doing news footage, and like the very early day of explorer travelers that would, you know, document their journey just going down a river. But the amount of wildlife there was just, I really can't believe how much has been lost since the 1930s in Africa. That place, there was not, you couldn't throw a stone without hitting an animal, literally. And now you need to go on tours to try to drive through and look for these things. But before, people were terrified of herds of elephants and especially buffalo running, terrified of hippopotamus, like wildebeests and all, just like millions and millions and millions and millions of animals migrating at the same time. Like when a herd of something would come running, especially buffalo. Like whole villages would get torn apart. I mean, they were terrified of buffalo stampedes. Can you imagine like 100,000 buffalo running through at full speed? 1 million buffalo at full speed? I mean, there's nothing stopping that. So I digress. I do see Viv B says to us, David Ransom, you misspelled civilization. Civilization is missing an I on the screen. But I looked and I see it says Civilization Psycho Live. I don't see the I missing. So perhaps, Viv, you could fill us in where that is going to help us to spell better. And as we look through the comments here, there's a ton of volcanoes going off right now. Yes, there are. And they're going to be more, especially when we get into these different changes that we see electromagnetically. The Earth's crust can only take so much. So you hear the stories of Noah. The rainfall that was coming down for 40 days and 40 nights, that was some sort of perturbance where there was, I don't know. It seemed that there was a cloud coating around the planet at the time that somehow got shocked and then it started to rain out. But at the same time, beneath the ground, the water was shooting up in like 1,000-foot jets from multiple locations, obviously across the planet, because water just shot out of the ground thousands of feet in millions of locations for more than a month. And the above ground precipitation rained at like the heaviest record rain you've ever seen for like a month straight, 40 days. So between the Earth crust opening up and oozing out its water, by the way, which water is continuously generated in the Earth's mantle, you just have those different atoms that are floating around, or not floating, but moving around until something, whether it be oil with the carbons and the hydrogens and the hydrocarbons, or if it's hydrogen and oxygen, those two are going to come into contact. And primary water source is what you would find, like a never-ending, continuous regeneration of water within our crust. Now, it pushes out in some points at the Earth's surface here. Libya is one of those. If you're looking at the major oil, abiotic oil that does the same thing, that refills itself into like a main trunk that touches the surface, that would be the BP oil spill. They were trying to drill into that, not directly over it, but they were something like 30 miles off trying to drill into that thing horizontally. They were terrified of the pressure, the overpressurization. And then we saw the deep water, right? Whoosh. So they kind of left that one alone. It's a monster with the pressure. Libya, somehow Gaddafi had tapped into that primary water resource and was like, hey, even if we don't have rainfall coming out of the skies in the desert, we have all this water under our feet, like these 12,000 cubic kilometers just under Libya. Let's tap that for a minute because it keeps refilling off the Mediterranean. Awesome. And they started growing, I think that one test project down there at the very south, which was right at the base, or at the bottom of one of the old mega lakes. Obviously, you're going to want to go to a low point when you're drilling for water. One of the mega lakes there, they were doing 100,000 acres of sorghum as a test crop. And then America went in and bombed all their water infrastructure, all the pipelines that came from that primary water source. Were the first things damaged, not oil refinery equipment, all the waterworks projects put out. So there's something, the validity to that. So that, imagine if all this water comes squirting out of the earth at the same time we come into these electromagnetic anomalies. And Ransom in reference, instantaneous change within a generation, there's a new species suddenly. Well, would that be cosmic rays? Because I'm looking at a NOVA article here. Okay, so this is like back in June. There's like, hey, in the next, 6 months or so, we're going to see the Coronae Borealis, the brightest nova of a generation. It seems to be on an 80-year cycle. So it's a micronova from the constellation Corona Borealis, but it's one of the stars at the very southern tip of that. Now it's going to grow bright enough where it's going to look like an extra large, super gigantic North Star just appeared in our heavens. Now, this thing is on a 80-year cycle outburst. But if we go back to 1217, the amount of cosmic rays that they measured from this one was the highest ever recorded. And then we look at that and you say, wait a second. The Jin dynasty collapses over in China in earnest right around 1200 AD, complete collapse. The Mayans had collapsed around 800 AD due to drought and other changes, and then the Aztec take completely over around 1200, which means whatever had happened there, whatever remnants of the Mayans were still hanging on, were completely wiped out. There was none left, and the Aztecs took everything and started in what we consider the Aztec age, say 1230 AD. So this micronova had a significant impact in ice layering, that they can find the cosmic ray density in the ice layers down in Greenland and Antarctica both. But at the same time, we find multiple civilizations across the planet had some sort of reset occur to them right around this 1200 era AD, of course. And here we are again. This is another thing that comes on top of the layering of strangeness. Once in a 2,000-year electromagnetic planetary secondary magnetic field anomaly is occurring, or going to occur at its most intense somewhere late October. We got NASA just tells us they found a new electric field across the planet that could be tapped, and we could harvest that atmospheric electricity 2 weeks ago. But then we have a once in a 80-year cycle micronova that has intensities that vary also. The regular 80-year cycle on this thing, yeah, we see it, it's very bright. But then there's the supernova that really damages, and a huge amount of cosmic rays come rolling in and have some effect on our planet, where it wipes out, the current civilization, high tech, high society of the day, from China over to South America. And I would encourage anybody to look across European history and see what happened around 1200 AD and the amount of wars that were started and shifts of kingdoms, shall we say. What went on there? What was going on? They have some, recollections of why, France was starting to fight at this time. Like, what is going on? Why does England suddenly go off the hook here? Why is Spain getting agitated in the same eras? That's the whole question. Like, what does this do to humanity? So now we got all these layers of things on top of each other. And you're telling me that this incredible scatter wave with politics coming in and just the same months all of this is overlaying is not perception management on the part of the elite? Like, what we're looking at celestially here is the overlaying of these cycles in itself. Like, how many more hundreds of thousands of years would it take for this perfect cycle to line up again? That's more the question. Like, when are we going to get the planetary cross with our planet between Jupiter, Earth, Mercury, Sun, perfect line, and at the same time, on the same seconds of the same day, in a different direction, we're lined up Mars, Earth, Venus, which are all closer in planets. All coupled on top of this secondary magnetic field, on top of this outbreak, Corona Borealis, bright micronova with increased cosmic ray density, and the Earth's magnetic field is changing by about 1% per year now. Like, the overlay of all these possibilities coming on, it would take hundreds of thousands of years before we come back to the same juncture again. Because the Earth's magnetic field declining at 1% per year, that only happens when perhaps we start to onset into an ice age, when the sun behaves strangely, where, then we're talking of possibly millions of years to get a repeat of something like this. So I'm really looking at the perception optics of all of these celestial events that are going to and are in process of disrupting our present world. Like, if you can't see that our present world is being disrupted, I'm sorry, you're not awake. You're not looking clearly, is what I'm saying. If you can't see that something's changed and it's continuing to change faster, like a snowball going down the hill out of control, then I think you're lying to yourself, truly. And it's so funny that I get people on the DAP 2030 channel right now. Well, nothing's really changed. And, you're wrong, because 5 years ago, nothing's really changed. I just kind of even roll my eye. Like, I don't even have a response to that. Like, the cognitive dissonance of somebody actually to write a comment. Like, nothing's changed in 5 years. You're wrong. I mean, there are not. There aren't any words for that, really. Like, get back on your meds, maybe? I don't know. So, Ransom, what do you think then with all these things overlaying together? I mean, then we got all the comets and fireballs rolling through right now, the incredible amount of volcanic eruptions that are upticking at the same time. I'm just really kind of curious. And let me see here.
Never let a good emergency go to waste. There's so many of people out there, I bet, are giddy for any number of these things to change on Earth so that they can take control of more things. And I was showing everybody the Nova. I know that ancient people, the Aztec. We'll start with the Aztec because you brought them up, which is a strange, a really strange group of people that seem to have also come out of nowhere, right? They don't have an origin place that, everybody can look at and say, oh, yeah, that's the Aztec. That's where they came from right there. They used to live here, and then they moved here. No one knows where they came from. Another weird thing about them is they show up with artwork and weapons straight out of the Pleistocene era, right? Like everybody else is using bows and small arrows. They show up using these big Solutrean type, points on these big staffs. They're using the atlatl, another, Pleistocene era Stone Age weapon. And something triggered them to move from wherever they were to where they went. And they were big believers of the sky too. And they just so happened to show up with other civilizations that were marking the sky too. So we know, when people went into Africa, they didn't really find, examples of, and I'm not talking about North Africa, but like Sub-Saharan all the way down. They didn't find examples of where people had left the Stone Age and started building big monuments like they have everywhere else. In the Americas, decolonization kind of started when they had returned to the Stone Age. So at some point, obviously, due to all of the massive mounds, pyramids, stoneworks, megalithic works, that they had complex mathematics and high civilization several times over here. So there's like this big history of people over here. The thing that combines them with Europeans and the Chinese, or not the Chinese specifically, but East Asians, is that all throughout history, they've been paying attention to the sky, and they have a direct link to ancestors that have been paying attention not 26,000 years, but at least 52,000 years, and maybe 3 times the 26,000, just to make sure and verify that this same cycle happened again. So like the first time, you would have noticed that it set back. But how long would it have taken to notice that 26,000 years is a cycle without keeping track of it for 3 times that amount of time, just to know that it not only did the same thing, but then it did the same thing again? Now, kind of the question is there something that goes along with that exact cycle that you could mark down as somebody that's elite, like not unlike the Aztec and the Mayans were doing with their calendar? They knew certain things were going to happen, like the movement of the planets. They knew that they were going to be here. They knew they were going to be there. So they were keeping track of all of these things. But not only that, it meant something significant to them when these things happen. Now, why? They might not have known, but at some point during one of these cycles, somebody knew that there was some importance in the reoccurrence of things in the celestial sky, to the point that there are probably people right now that have been handed down information through the mystery schools and other lineages and legacies that allow them to know exactly how bad things are going to be, what to expect during those times. And if you imagine you have access to the oldest records of human history, some of the oldest oral traditions, some of the oldest files and artwork and things like that. But on top of that, you have cutting edge technology that can confirm or deny some of those things. But not only that, now we have algorithms to predict when and where these events are going to happen. So they're telling us that simultaneously that we're now beginning to use quantum computing to calculate and predict things that are unimaginable. But at the same time, we're going to ignore things like Hunga Tunga or other stuff, knowing that it's going to cause massive damage and casualties. Now, that reminds me of a story in the Anunnaki Tales when they're talking about the great deluge that happened and whether or not they should tell the regular mankind, all us peasants living down here on the ground, that something bad is going to happen and your world is going to be forever changed by about evidently 400 feet of water worldwide, not to mention the damage that occurred from, not only the flooding, the erosion, the, all of these different things, tsunamis, and I'm sure earthquakes and volcanic activity at different times contributed to the transition of a totally different world that we have no idea about. Now, do you think that happened overnight? I would say that it kind of did. When you look at the, Carolina Bays theory, which is turning out to seemingly be way more than a theory, but the most logical thing that happened is something from space broke apart and hit North America and maybe even parts of Europe and totally devastated the ice sheets and all of the environments in the Northern Hemisphere, killing all of the megafauna, erasing almost every trace of whatever civilization lived there. All we found are remnants of what's called the Clovis culture, and we only have one single body supposedly connected to that. So we have absolutely no idea what was going on just before the Ice Age was over, the end of the Hunger Dryas and all of this. So something happened, and I would say that overnight, people around the world knew about it, and there was no, arguments about, hey, something major is happening, because there's also evidence of airburst explosions over the Middle East. And a lot of this could explain why different civilizations started digging into the earth and making complicated underground bunkers, not unlike what the continuity of government have done today. So you can bet they won't tell you. It will be devastating if that's what it is, and they're not going to help you. So you kind of have to be like ready to go, not only to the next life, but to skedaddle from where you live. Just imagine if Yellowstone put out a small volcanic eruption, not a super big one like everybody talks about. It could have explode the super volcano. What if it was just a much smaller thing that could devastate entire parts? Actually, the whole nation, even if it just spewed out some stuff, say it went over and destroyed Kansas or, and Nebraska, and it went on a line that way or something, that would put out food production in this part of the world for decades and decades and decades. So they don't tell you that any little thing, like you brought up the North, what is it? I always forget the acronym for it, but basically the current that goes through the Atlantic that could cool down and fundamentally transform environments from, like the polar regions down to the UK and all the way down to Florida. Most likely it would totally change. The weather would change. The environment would change. And so would the living of the people on there. And I think people forget that these things can happen overnight. And those are just the natural ones. And, we're talking about different stuff. There's any number of rocks out there they're already keeping track of. They have no idea whether Apophis will hit the Earth, hit the moon, fly between us, or what will happen. They can only predict. But kind of circle back about my point, you can bet that the lineages of legacies around the world, like probably stuff like the Vatican and other, mystery schools that have morphed into secret societies and been embedded in governments around the world, which I would, put to you, they don't even know who's in charge of those. It's so big and so secret and so compartmentalized that we don't know who's actually running the world. And I think they're kind of giving us a TV version of that here in the United States. We have a president But is he the president? Is he in charge of stuff? Supposedly they gave the keys to the White House over to the vice president today. But when you look at them, they don't seem to be really competent enough people to run, I'm going to say a Dairy Queen, much less the United States of America or our position as supposedly a financial giant superpower and leader of the free world, which I would remind you is slowly evaporating away any semblance of a free world when you look at supposedly the leaders of the free world and the links that they'll go through to not only tell you that your laws of your nations don't matter, that your elections don't matter. You can see what's going on in France and other countries where people have decided, you know what, I don't care what you guys voted in. We're just going to go ahead and stay in powder, but we're okay because we're NATO and we're the good guys, so you can ignore it when we do that. Or like in Ukraine when they suspended any kind of free journalism, freedom of religion, any of that stuff. Every country around the world is susceptible to totalitarianism. Just look at Brazil, Venezuela, on and on and on. You can't even point to like countries that are doing good nowadays and go that far back in time where they weren't part of a totalitarian regime, and then look at what they produce is about 200 year-long empires that fail over and over again. Failure, they just rebrand, rename, they keep their secret information to themselves, and they let destruction kind of run away with itself. And every time they're there with the answer to your emergency because they never let an emergency go to waste. Now, we're dealing now in the modern times with the kind of focal point of all of those totalitarian regimes throughout time, and it's taking the form of a communist, capitalist, Marxist-based society that just does whatever it wants and expects the peasants to go along with that. And part of that seems to include, but not limited to, the reduction of people, their rights, and their way of life, starting first with our food production, because there's no argument that in Europe and the United States, regulations seem to go out of control when it comes to the things that you put in your body as the basic nutrition. There's a war against milk. There's a war against cheese. There's a war against farming organically, basically, or ranching organically to have clean meat and vegetables and fruits delivered to your table. And there's so many middlemen now that are adding their additives. And now we are in a position where everything is saturated with forever chemicals, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. You know, if you're a fan of potatoes, if you're not eating organic potatoes, guess what you're eating a bunch of? Massive amounts of fungicide. Now, I'm not even going to claim I know what the long-term effects of that are, but judging by the worldwide fertility rate and cancer rate and super cancer introduction rate, where people just getting it and then they're saying, oh, sorry, you got this and bye, it looks like maybe some of that might be connected in some way. I'm just saying. Hello, is anyone there?
Can I hear it from the top of the mountain? Yeah. Give me some bluegrass at the revival there, Ransom. Speaking some deep points this evening. Please remember, civilizationcycle.com if you want to get the show notes from the last 2 hours of our conversation. You know, we try to wind it pretty tight by following stories that we've viewed through the week. I do put it into show notes, 8 to 10 bullet points, you know, if you would like to use those as talking points, share with others, or even just to kind of remind what we spoke about during this, so you don't have to take notes during the show. But everywhere we look, the changes are all-encompassing. And that's another thing that I noticed, too, is just at a whim, they can change the structure of government. Okay, so suddenly, like the governance system can be changed in a moment's notice. Debt can be written off at a moment's notice. All assets can be bailed in a moment's notice. Like the illusion of what was truly an illusion. You had no property rights. You never owned a single thing. the illusion of a government being what it was when it started was fictitious, because now you see it changing in real time by the week or the minute into something else. And that's happening across the entire planet. So it's not just exclusive in the United States, but other places are also shifting out of more totalitarian into more of a open society. But you go, wow, that's so great. They're getting freedom. No, they're just opening the markets to bring on and restart the debt system there, just like they did in China in the late 1990s. Yay, to be rich is glorious. Well, maybe it wasn't. I don't know, too bourgeois. But again, they open all these markets. All it is an ebb and flow of one set of governance, one set of system, one set of reserve currency shifting to the next place on the planet through a series of reconstructed, rinsed and repeated actions. Demonizations, finger pointings. There's nothing new under the sun. It truly is nothing new. I totally understand that saying. Like, I really get it now. History is just whitewashed with the same actions over and over again to reset the debt system, to allow those that are making money or allowing mining to continue to obtain the metals that they wish for whatever purpose continues. This is a farm. This planet is a farm. We are farm animals managed on this planet. The perception is that you are free and this system and these borders are free and you're in this system, so you're more free than that system, when in reality, we're all in a bunch of fences. So please remind all of your friends to sign up for civilizationcycle.com. Show notes, live show notes list. See you next week. Thanks for your time following this together. Please leave some comments on what you think the solution should be for this. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for your valuable time. I hope you got value out of this program to enhance your life during the transition. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to Revolution.